Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some fascinating Python trends today, specifically from the first half of 2023. We're going to be looking at, well, a really unique source. Highlights from the first 30 issues of a newsletter. It's called Python Trend Weekly. And the cool thing is, it was originally created by a Chinese developer for the Chinese Python community.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Not often we, get a glimpse into what's happening in other parts of the global tech world. Makes you wonder, like, what's the Python scene like over there? What's different?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, the author talks about that right up front. They mention how even though Python's huge worldwide, it seems like it has a kind of a smaller presence in China's job market and developer community. So they really wanted to bridge that gap, connect those two worlds, which is pretty ambitious.
Yeah, definitely a big goal. And wow, they really put in the work. Just these first 30 issues we're looking at, there's like over 400 articles and
Yeah.
tutorials, 300 projects. I mean, it's a ton of content.
It's a mountain of information. And what's crazy? It was clearly hitting a nerve because, get this, even with all that content, each issue averaged almost 30 likes on WeChat. I think that's like their version of Facebook likes, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's huge engagement. Shows people weren't just skimming, they were really digesting this stuff, finding value. Speaks volumes about the thirst for Python knowledge, even in a community where maybe it's not the dominant language professionally, at least not yet.
Right, right. So, okay, let's get into some of the trends they highlighted. Unsurprisingly, AI was, well, it was everywhere. Just tons of AI projects popping up on GitHub.
Makes sense. I mean, the whole AI boom was in full swing by then.
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me is the author, they made a point of focusing on the smaller, more unique AI projects. Like they were trying to curate a selection that went beyond the usual suspects.
Yeah. Yeah, smart move. Otherwise, it'd be like AI overload. Another trend that jumped out at me was this whole integration of Rust and Python. There was a lot of buzz around projects like Pyo3, this idea that Rust makes Python great again. Have you been following this at all?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's fascinating to see how folks are trying to kind of combine the strengths of both. You got Python, which is so easy to use, huge ecosystem, and then Rust with its speed and safety.
Exactly. Best of both worlds. And we even saw some cool tools coming out of that, like Rough, which is this super fast linter written in Rust.
Yeah.
And then there's Rye, which is an experimental package manager,
Right.
also uses Rust. What's cool is both of those were created by Armin Ronacher, the guy behind Flask. It's almost like he's saying, hey, we can fix some of Python's performance issues by borrowing from Rust.
Yeah, it's an intriguing approach. Shows the community's getting more open to new solutions, even if it means using languages that were traditionally seen as kind of competitors.
Yeah, breaking down the walls a little bit. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. There were some pretty serious security worries around PyPI. The Python package index, remember all that drama?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget? It was a wild ride. First, you had that wave of, like, malware attacks targeting PyPI users.
Mm.
Then they had to ditch the PGP signatures, which were, supposed to be a security thing. Turned out most of them weren't even valid.
Yeah, I never understood that whole thing. And then on top of that, the Department of Justice, they slap them with a subpoena for user data.
Wow.
And in the end, they had to force everyone to use two-factor authentication. Felt like they were playing catch-up the whole time.
Yeah, it really exposed the vulnerabilities of open source ecosystems, especially as they grow bigger, become more critical.
Yeah.
You can't treat security as an afterthought.
Absolutely. Now, the newsletter also covered some key takeaways from the Python Language Summit, which is basically where the core Python devs get together and hash out the future of the language.
Yeah, yeah. Always interesting to see what they're thinking about.
Yeah, peek behind the curtain. So one of the biggies was C API compatibility. Seems like, third-party extensions were breaking left and right with each new Python update, and that was causing a lot of frustration. HPY, which is this new API for writing extensions, came up as a possible solution.
Interesting. So addressing stability issues, not just at the package level, but at the core language level, too.
Exactly, yeah. And then there was the never-ending story of the GIL, the Global Interpreter Lock. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Been a thorn in everyone's side for years because it limits how well Python can use multi-core processors. Well, the Nogle project, which aims to make the GIL optional, that was making some progress. They were talking about it potentially being a game changer for performance, especially for multi-threaded applications.
Potentially huge, but I imagine there's some massive challenges in changing something so fundamental, right? What were they saying about that?
Oh yeah, tons of concerns would existing code still work? What about debugging? Sounded like a massive undertaking. They were also having some interesting chats about the future of standard libraries. The general feeling seemed to be that they should focus more on like helping people write better Python code rather
Yeah.
than trying to be everything to everyone. So some older libraries were, facing deprecation, and any new ones would have to go through a much tougher vetting process.
Makes sense. It's about like streamlining the core and making sure it stays, relevant and maintainable
Yeah.
as the whole ecosystem keeps growing and evolving.
Totally. Oh, and two other cool things from the summit that I jotted down. There was this push to enhance pattern matching syntax, which is a relatively new feature in Python, and some exciting chatter about using the Beware project to, get this, run Python on mobile, like Android and iOS.
Wow, Python on mobile, that's always been kind of the holy grail, hasn't it? Could be a big deal if they can actually pull it off. What were we saying about the hurdles?
Well, one of the main things was the need for really solid CI testing to make sure things work across different devices and operating systems. Plus, there's the whole challenge of getting people used to the idea of Python as a mobile development language. It's a pretty big mental shift.
It is. It really is. It feels like Python's making a serious move into the mobile space.
Mm.
But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I think it's worth kind of zooming in on some of these amazing projects the newsletter highlighted. Because it's one thing to talk about like trends in the abstract, but seeing the real world stuff, that's what brings it to life, right?
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes you get lost in the big picture, forget about what people are actually building with Python.
Right, exactly. And the range of projects here is just mind-blowing. I mean, we've touched on a few, like Pandas AI,
Yeah.
MicroPython, but there's so much more that deserves a shout-out.
Okay, so which one jumps out at you first?
Well, there was this project called Digital Life
Hmm.
that really grabbed my attention. You know how we all have those voice assistants on our phones now?
Hmm.
Well, this was all about creating a Python-based voice assistant. But the twist is it interacts with a front end that can like render character animations
Mm.
and handle audio. So the author described it as like giving the assistant a life of its own.
Oh, wow, that's cool. So it's not just about like standing your commands, it's about like creating a more, I don't know, engaging interactive experience, like the next evolution of those kind of sterile Siri Alexa things.
Exactly. And it shows how Python can power these richer, more immersive experiences, Oh, and remember we were talking about that whole Rust and Python integration thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's this really cool project that kind of exemplified that perfectly. It was a voice conversion framework that used a technique called top one retrieval to prevent voice leakage and get some pretty impressive results, even with limited training data.
Voice conversion is such a hot area right now, with applications and everything from like entertainment to accessibility. But I can imagine it gets pretty complex, especially when you're trying to like prevent voice leakage. What is top one retrieval anyway?
So it's basically a method for selecting the most relevant voice sample from a database
Yeah.
based on the input speech. And by using this technique, they were able to kind of boost the accuracy and naturalness, while also making sure the converted voice didn't contain any traces of the original speaker.
That's amazing. And the fact that they use Rust for those performance games really shows how those two languages can work together.
Absolutely. Another one that stood out to me was an ebook translator designed as a Calibre plugin. Calibre, the ebook management software.
Well, I use Calibre all the time.
So this plugin lets you translate ebooks right within Calibre. What's impressive is it supports a ton of different translation engines, like Google Translate, ChatGPT, DeepL, and it works with a bunch of different ebook formats.
Wow, that's huge for anyone who reads in multiple languages.
Yeah.
It's amazing how Python's being used to like break down those language barriers, make information more accessible. Kind of reminds me of that project we talked about earlier, the one focused on creating that ultra lightweight Python engine.
Yeah. Imagine running Python on devices with like as little as 64 KB of flash memory and 4 KB of RAM.
Mm-hmm.
Opens up a whole new world of possibilities for using Python in those resource-constrained environments.
It really does, yeah. Like think about the Internet of Things, embedded systems, tiny wearable devices even. Python could become like the go-to language for that kind of stuff. But let's shift gears a bit, talk about some of the discussions around the language itself. The newsletter mentioned this proposal to allow list comprehensions within 4 loop headers. Can you imagine?
Wow, that's a bold idea. I mean, list comprehensions are already so powerful for creating lists in a concise way, but put them right in the loop header.
Mm-hmm.
It could make code more compact, but I could also see it getting pretty hard to read. It's a good example of how, like, the evolution of the language itself is always up for debate. Some folks will love it, others will hate it.
Yeah, definitely a controversial change. Speaking of making things easier for devs, though, there was this project called Wing It UI. It aimed to create a user-friendly graphical interface for package managers on Windows. So it supports popular tools like Wing It, Scoop, Chocolatey.
Oh, that's a great idea. I mean, package management can be such a pain, especially on Windows. A nice GUI would make it so much more approachable,
Hmm.
especially for folks who aren't, comfortable with the command line.
Exactly. Okay, ready for another mind-blowing one. So there was this open source project. It lets you run a localized version of a large language model, like GPT, entirely on your own machine. No cloud services, no data privacy concerns, just pure AI power on your local device.
Wow, that's incredible. It really speaks to this trend of like democratizing access to these powerful AI tools.
Hmm.
Not everyone wants to rely on cloud services or hand over their data to third parties. This puts the control back in the hands of individual developers.
Yeah, exactly. And along those same lines, there was another project that used Docker and only 80 lines of Python code to create a prompt tool kind of similar to Midjourney's image analysis feature. And it even supported both CPU and GPU inference.
So even someone with like limited coding experience could potentially create their own AI-powered image generation tools. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. It seems like, 2023 was the year of empowering developers with AI capabilities, regardless of their resources or expertise. Really exciting to see those barriers breaking down.
Absolutely it is. And on that note, there's another AI project I just got to mention, Cyber Waifu.
Cyber waifu. Okay, now you've got my attention.
So it uses LangChain, a framework we've talked about before, to create a chatbot, but with a personalized personality, voice, even a self-portrait.
So it's like an AI companion that you can kind of customize to your liking. That's wild. Kind of blurs the lines between technology and companionship. Raises some interesting questions about the social implications of AI.
Definitely does.
Yeah.
And it shows how Python's being used to explore these kind of unconventional, thought-provoking applications. But, let's not forget the more practical side of things. There's this really neat project called Jest that introduced a new data serialization format, like TOML, YAML, JSON.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those.
So the author claimed this new format was more readable, more user-friendly compared to those other options. They
Mm.
argued that, TOML, YAML, JSON, they can be tough to parse, especially for humans. And they wanted to create something that was both, machine-readable and human-friendly.
It's always cool to see new data formats emerge. Shows that we're still searching for better ways to represent and exchange data, especially as the amount of data we're dealing with keeps exploding.
Totally. And speaking of making things more user-friendly, there was this tool called trove that could generate like an attractive user interface for command line programs.
Oh, so it's like giving a makeover to those old school command line tools that we all use, but kind of secretly wish were a little more visually appealing.
Exactly. Exactly. It's all about improving the developer experience, even when you're working with the less glamorous parts of software development. Now, this next one's for all the data scientists and Jupyter Notebook fans out there. There was a project called IPFlow that introduced a reactive Python kernel for Jupyter. Have you ever used that?
I haven't personally, but I've heard good things about it. What's so special about it?
So basically, it tracks data flow relationships between symbols and cells in your Jupyter Notebook. And that enables some pretty neat features like responsive execution, where cells automatically re-execute when their dependencies change, and execution suggestions based on the current state of your notebook.
That sounds incredibly useful. Like having an intelligent assistant helping you navigate and understand your code could really speed things up for data scientists. Anyone do an interactive data analysis?
For sure, it reflects the growing sophistication of tools designed for these kind of interactive and exploratory workflows. Oh, and I got to mention this one because it touches on a topic we've talked about before. This project called Solara. It offered a way to create web applications using a pure Python React-style framework.
Hmm.
It uses a library called Reactin, which is essentially a Python implementation of React.
Wait, so you're saying you can build React-style web apps, but without writing any JavaScript?
Yeah, that's right. It suggests there's a real desire to bring those declarative and component-based paradigms from the front-end world into the Python ecosystem.
I wonder if it'll catch on. Could be a game changer for Python devs who want to build web apps but aren't as comfortable with JavaScript. What do you think?
Hard to say. I mean, JavaScript's got such a strong hold on web development. But if Solara can provide a truly seamless and intuitive experience, it could definitely gain some traction, especially among Python devs who are already familiar with React concepts.
Yeah, good point. Okay, back to the newsletter. What else caught your eye?
Well, there was this intriguing project called PyStack. It's essentially a Python-based version of the PyStack command line tool
Hmm.
that's commonly used on Linux systems to display the function call stack of a process.
So, a tool for debugging those nasty crashes and hangs we all love to hate.
Exactly. But what's cool about this Python version is it can even display information about whether a thread is holding, waiting for, or releasing the GIL. It's like shining a light on one of Python's most notorious quirks.
That's pretty neat. It shows how Python's being used to build tools that help us kind of understand and manage the complexities of the language itself.
Okay, I got to mention this one. Girlfriend GPT.
Girlfriend GPT. All right, you have my attention.
So, as the name suggests, it aims to create an AI girlfriend using ChatGPT. Definitely a provocative concept.
It certainly pushes the boundaries of what we typically think of as AI applications. I'm curious, what was the author's intention behind this project?
Well, it was presented as a starter project, encouraging developers to, personalize the personality, the voice, even create a self-portrait. It seemed more like a playful exploration of the potential for AI companionship, more than a serious attempt to create a replacement for human relationships.
It's fascinating to see how Python's being used to explore these kind of unconventional and thought-provoking applications. It definitely raises some ethical questions, but it also sparks the imagination.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what other unexpected applications will people come up with for this technology.
Absolutely. It speaks to the creative energy within the Python community. There's this willingness to experiment, to push boundaries, to have some fun along the way.
It really is. It's amazing what people are coming up with.
It is. And it's not all, AI girlfriends and crazy language features.
Yeah.
There were a bunch of projects focused on like solving real world problems. Like there was this tool, Domain Admin, built
Yeah.
using Python and Vue.js. Basically, it monitors domain names and SSL certificates
Hmm.
and sends you automatic email alerts when things are about to expire.
Oh, that's so useful. I can't tell you how many times I've let a domain name lapse or a certificate just because I forgot to renew it. A tool like that would be like a lifesaver.
I know, right? It's one of those things you don't think about till it's too late, and then you're scrambling.
Exactly. Speaking of practical tools, there was this visual web scraping software called Easy Spider. Sounded pretty cool. It lets you design and execute web scrapers just by selecting the content you want from a web page. It even had a command line interface, so you could integrate it with other systems. Have you ever done any web scraping?
I have, yeah. It's super useful for gathering data, but it can be pretty technical. A tool like that could really open it up to people who aren't like web scraping experts.
That's what I was thinking. Could be a great way for folks to get into data analysis and machine learning without having to become coding ninjas first. Oh, and for the gamers out there was a project that used Python to build a Telegram bot. They even deployed it on the render platform.
Telegram bots are so cool. You can use them for like everything: notifications, reminders, games, interactive experiences. It's a great platform for just trying stuff out.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, now this next project, this one really grabbed my attention. It's called NeoDB, and the author described it as a federated universe for books, movies, music, and games.
Federated universe, huh? That's an interesting way to put it. What does that even mean?
So it's kind of like an open source, censorship resistant version of Duban, which is this popular Chinese social networking platform for reviewing and discussing books, movies, music, all sorts of cultural stuff.
So like a more decentralized, open platform for sharing and discovering cultural content.
Exactly. And it's built entirely with Python. It seems like a really ambitious project, but also like a really important one, especially these days when online censorship is getting more and more prevalent.
I agree. It's inspiring to see people using technology to create those kinds of platforms,
Yeah.
more open, more accessible. Speaking of access, the newsletter mentioned this incredible resource. It's called CPython Internals. It's an online book that dives deep into the implementation of the CPython interpreter, explains everything from like syntax parsing to bytecode execution. It's basically a gold mine of knowledge for anyone who wants to understand how Python really works under the hood.
That sounds like an amazing resource for anyone who wants to take their Python skills to the next level. Understanding how the interpreter works can help you write more efficient code, debug those tricky problems, maybe even contribute to Python itself.
Absolutely. And it's a good reminder that there's always more to learn, even with a language as widely used and well documented as Python.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Python in 2023. It's amazing how much we covered just from those first 30 issues of Python Trend Weekly.
It really is. It's a testament to the energy and the diversity of the PyCon community, even beyond the usual Western perspective.
And that's exactly why resources like this newsletter is so important. They give us this curated glimpse into the ever-changing world of the language, its applications, and the amazing people who are pushing it forward.
Couldn't agree more. It's clear that Python is a language that's constantly evolving, adapting,
Yeah.
finding new ways to solve problems, to express creativity.
So to our listeners, I encourage you, stay curious, keep exploring, never stop learning. The world of Python is vast and full of incredible things. And who knows, maybe you'll be the one creating the next groundbreaking project. That makes its way into Python Trend Weekly.
Until next time, happy coding, everyone.